Learn Persian with Chai and Conversation. aybé, rendān, makon, an introduction with Muhammad Ali of Persian Poetics. Salam,
Salam,
Muhammad Ali Jan.
salam.
It is
Obasti.
very good to see you. It's been a while.
It has been. It's almost been like a year, I think, since we recorded something, probably.
Yeah, that's right. And now we're back with the first Hafez poem that we're doing together. I'm super excited about this. This is actually, I asked Muhammad Ali to choose a poem, a Hafez poem that would be relatable, empowering, exciting, energizing. And I think he picked the absolute perfect one, which
You're
we're
too kind.
calling aybé, rendān, makon, because that's the first three words. And we're going to go over exactly what that is. But Muhammad Ali, do you want to tell us, let's start with a little bit of a background on Hafez and what Hafez means to you and to Iranians.
Absolutely. So I'll give you first the academic kind of nerd side of Hafez, which is what I focus on, and then I'll talk about what most Iranians can probably relate to when it comes to Hafez. Hafez is living in 13th century or 14th century, I should say, Iran. And Iran is a very tumultuous time, and especially his native Shiraz sees a lot of kings coming and going and what you could call civil strife, civil war, a lot of instability. And during his lifetime, he also lives under a very, you could call him tyrannical. Maybe that's a bit of a modern idea of, or way of thinking about the leader, but a very tyrannical kind of leader who has an appetite similar to the modern Iranian government for applying religious law very harshly, which was basically a departure from the norm. Most sultans or leaders in his day were famous for being impious, right? They were warriors, they were warlords, they were conquerors. They weren't really people of piety. But this king, Mubarak ad-Din, comes along halfway through Hafez's life, and he happens to be very, very strict, harsh religious by nature. We call him khoshke mazhabi, so dry religious in Persian, very strict, kind of that type of maybe a nun in the Western tradition. Iran we'd call him zahid, va'iz, akhund, that type of very kind of harsh, religion is rules, this, that type of person. And Hafez begins to suffer under this individual because he is so uninterested in music and poetry and the type of things that artistic people care about. And he actually bans music. He bans the wine houses. So Hafez turns into a little bit of a political protester during this era, which is producing this poem. So that's kind of the academic element. And Hafez is also, it's important to note, he was a court poet. So it's not like nowadays where you sell books or you perform on Instagram or something like that, like I could say I do. At the time, your only hope as an artist was to be funded by the court. So if you were a painter, a musician, a poet, you had to make the kings and the people of high society happy with you, and they'd pay you. And during this time, Hafez is also not getting any money. So he's quite broke, actually, you can say, to use a modern term. But to speak as an Iranian and to speak to the things that we can all relate to, Hafez is in a way the national poet of Iran. So he's our Shakespeare, to use kind of an English speaking example. And Hafez really does speak to the soul of all Iranians. So this element that I mentioned, many Iranians, especially today, can relate to for better or for worse. But he speaks to things that everyone relates to. When you go to Hafez's grave in Iran, and hopefully we can all do that one day, you see all strata of society, rich, poor, religious, irreligious. I remember there's not famous photo, but one of the photos of his grave, on either ends of his grave, there is a mullah and akhund and a woman with like basically no hijab, like Iranian style hijab with blonde hair praying. And this concept kind of perfectly symbolizes the relationship Iranians have with Hafez, where everyone thinks that, oh, Hafez is speaking to me. So he from the academic side, we're interested, and from the national poet side, he's very much kind of speaks to the Iranian soul. And all Iranians, they all love Hafez. They all have a few lines memorized. And Shab Yalda, we're all reading through the divan, trying to find our fortune. And he really is kind of like the Iranian, if you want to put it that way. I don't know if we can, but if you want to say like who really epitomizes what Iranians think of as their being, their identity, it really is Hafez. So many things we can relate to in an abstract way. And I'm sorry, I have a tendency to speak at length, but I feel so passionate about it. I went to Takht Jamshid. It's beautiful. It's our history, but my connection to it is very abstract. It's like it's my ancestry. Or you go to religious places. Not everyone is religious, but Hafez, he's speaking to you. He's a person who's having a conversation with you, and he's hitting directly at your heart and soul. So that's why we love him, and that's why I'm so animated right now speaking about him.
That's wonderful. And yeah, the analogy that you're saying, he's like Shakespeare. There's really no other, Shakespeare is a singular English poet. that in the English language that a lot of people have lines of his poetry memorized. Hafez is like omnipresent in Iran and is brought
Absolutely.
up all the time. You see Hafez poetry everywhere. You hear it all the time. Any life situation there's kind of a Hafez quip that people can kind of give. So
Absolutely. I
that's
mean, that's so important. Thank you for mentioning that. So Shakespeare is, we know he's important, but he's not so present in our lives, right? That's really, thank you
right.
for pointing that out. People, I don't want people to have the mistaken impression. When you say Shakespeare, you think literature class, some literature nerds are into it. But no, Hafez, he's on a billboard, he's on a meme, he's been spray painted on the wall, he's on people's Instagram bio. He's tattooed on people. He's, right here behind me. And this isn't mine, by the way. This is not my bias. This was here when I came here. So just to go, and this is in Turkey, by the way, not even in Iran. So the other day I was in the bazaar of Istanbul in some leather workers shop of all places. There was some Turkish translation of the divan just sitting in, and the only book
Wow.
in his old office just sitting there. He says, "Oh,
Wow.
Hafiz Shirazi, wow, amazing, çok güzel," and he's like pointing his favorite verse. He's very beautiful, çok güzel, Turkish. So Hafiz, and it's not just Iranians. I think this is also an important anecdote. In Afghanistan, and I went to Pakistan, and someone I met, he said, "Oh my God, Iran, I love Hafez." And this guy was just quoting Hafez every minute. He had essentially the whole
Wow.
thing by heart, and it's not even his native language. So it's no exaggeration to say Hafez is like on a level. I struggle to find an example really in the Western
Yeah.
tradition. Maybe you'd have to pick a rapper. Maybe he's like Tupac. Maybe something like that.
Right. And like you said, like he's speaking truth to power
Yeah,
constantly.
absolutely.
And so we can relate a lot, you're saying this instability, this tumultuous time, this
Yeah.
religious fanatics, all of that stuff I think we can all really relate to. And there's always kind of jabs in his poetry that there's double meanings and he's the
Mhm.
court poet, so he's over there in the heart of power, so he has to figure out a way to like say the things that he wants to say in a kind of backhanded way sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you see that in Hafez's poetry, like any good poet, has many layers. And if you kind of, some are more obvious, some weren't recited in the court, maybe they were discovered later, but other ones you can kind of secretly tease out some anti rulership, maybe some criticisms and other things. And I mean, poems like this and other poems maybe you can read in the future, hopefully, where he explicitly actually criticizes and he ends up, I mean, for these poets, it's impossible to kind of find exactly what happened in their life, but there's a lot of talk about how Hafez being excommunicated, being even declared a
Mm.
heretic, right? So many anecdotes have passed around about this, and whether or not it was true, if the anecdotes are historical and there's many of them, it shows that there's a high chance that it was true. Right? People wouldn't pass something on that seemed implausible. So it might have been even his burial location, which is, he writes about loving where he was buried, this area of Shiraz, which I think in a different podcast I've listened to is mentioned. Abe, Rukn Abad and Golgasht Mosalla, these places that he mentions, he's buried out there. But another thing that people mention is that was actually not a graveyard. He was buried kind of in the middle of nowhere because the religious authorities didn't consider him religious enough to be buried in a graveyard. They're like, oh, this guy's a heretic.
Interesting.
He needs to be buried off in the wilderness. So Hafez
Wow.
was a contentious. This is one thing as modern people looking back, it's easy to say, oh, of course everyone loved Hafez. But he was actually very kind of contentious in his lifetime, for as we'll see.
I mean, we can relate with that with Martin Luther King these days and just all
Absolutely.
these
Yeah,
like amazing
absolutely.
figures in time that are revered now, but in their day. Okay, so then this specific poem, I do want to say that, like I said, I asked Muhammad Ali to pick a poem himself, but this poem, my grandfather, wrote these books where he wrote out his favorite poems for all of us in his beautiful calligraphy, and this is one of the poems that he had on there, and I absolutely love this poem. It's so rich, so juicy. We can really go over each one of these words in this poem so many times.
Mhm.
But what made you think of this poem? Why did you choose it?
Choosing a Hafez poem, just one to recite, or the other day I had a student who I'm reading Hafez with in our private classes say, what is your favorite? Actually, another student just said that today, believe it or not, a few hours ago. Yesterday, one
Uh,
student said, so which is your favorite? And earlier today, a student also from Pakistan said, what is your favorite Hafez couplet? As if it was just an easy question. Like, what's your favorite, I don't know, food, or, what's your favorite musician? As if it's an easy. I said, there's no easy answer. Maybe one day I'll narrow it down. But when I pick a Hafiz poem, obviously we have to take the audience into account. Rumi has this beautiful line where he says, speak to people at the level they're at, speak to people where
mm,
they're at. And he has another one where, to kind of break down the religious terminology, basically there's two famous figures in Islam and certain sects love them. So he said, when you speak to someone from this sect, talk about that person. And when you speak to this one, talk to that one. So you always have to keep your audience. And I figure, okay, we have non-Persian learners. We have Iranians who are living through this current historical moment. What would be something everyone would relate to? Because if I pick something that's super Sufi, maybe some people are interested and dig out the terminology and learn what Sufism is about. Or if I pick something that's super contextual, about a political event in his lifetime that's nerds like me are interested in, they wouldn't like it. So I figure, okay, what's one with a good lesson? Everyone will like it. Everyone will be interested in kind of the theme. And especially us living in kind of these multicultural societies, how he mentions, as we'll see, the different houses of worship. And it has some deeper Sufi meanings embedded in there. But I think it's something that everyone can appreciate and that it's approachable, because that's what we were always, before we recorded, we were talking about what's the way to make this poetry approachable, because everyone says, oh,
right,
Hafez, not just Persian poetry, but the hardest one. How am I going to do this? No, it's not for me. But we really want to prove to everyone that, no, it is for you. There's always something there for you, even if you're at, learning level block 1 or something like that.
Absolutely. So what we're going to do with this poem is, as always, we're going to read the full thing. Muhammad Ali is going to read the Persian. I'm going to read the translation. So we'll read the full thing, and then afterwards we'll go through the poem bait by bait, section by section, and we'll talk about specific words and phrases in the poem. As always, this lesson is going to be with me and Muhammad Ali. In subsequent lessons, I'm going to go through small sections of the poem and go over it word by word, phrase by phrase, so that you can learn everything in the poem and how to use it in a current conversation. And it's a great way to learn the Persian language, because these words and phrases are very much a part of our vocabulary today. And before we start, I just want to say Muhammad Ali has a wonderful Instagram account, Persian Poetics. I highly recommend everybody follow it. Every day he puts different sections of poems from different poets. It's wonderful. And we also have an interview with Muhammad Ali where he talks about how he got to where he is today. I'll put that all in the show notes for this lesson so you can learn more about him. And he's been a long-time collaborator of Try in Conversation. So I really appreciate you being here, Muhammad Ali, as always.
You so much.
So Muhammad Ali is going to read the Persian, and I'm going to read the translation by Dick Davis, which is not a literal translation. We will include that in our PDF guide as well. But this kind of gets at the heart and meaning of the poem. So go ahead, Muhammad Ali.
Sure. aybé rendān makon ای زاهد پاکیزه سرشت که گناه دیگران بر تو نخواهند نوشت.
That you're a pious prig by nature doesn't mean you have to blame libertines for their faults. Those sins won't be imputed to your name.
من اگر نیکم و گر بد تو برو خود را باش. هر کسی آن درود عاقبت کار که کشت.
Each one of us will reap the seeds he sows. So what is it to you, whether I'm good or bad? To work on who you are should be your aim.
همه کس طالب یارن، چه هوشیار و چه مست. همه جا خانه عشق است، چه مسجد چه کنشت.
Everyone searches for the friend, whether they're drunk or stone cold sober, and love's in every house. The mosque and synagogue are just the same.
نه من از پرده تقوا به در افتادم و بس. پدرم نیز بهشت ابد از دست بهشت.
It's not just me who's wandered out of lonely piety's front door. My father let his chance of heaven's grace elude him. I'm the same.
حافظا روز اجل گر به کف آری جامی، یک سر از کوی خرابات برندت به بهشت.
Oh, Hafez, on the last day, if you bear a wine cup in your hand, you'll go straight into heaven from the street of drunkenness and shame. All right, beautiful. So just reading this, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Dick Davis, bless his heart, he tried, but man, the Persian is so rich, and I'm so excited to get into it with you. to go over each of these words because there's so much in there. Let's take it from the
Beautiful.
top.
So starting with the very first word, I mean, literally every word has some detail. Abe, this is one of those words that's so hard to translate. It can mean something like fault or error, but abe kardan essentially means to say that, to point out that someone has done a faux pas, right? So, oh, you've done something wrong. And there's this kind of, maybe many of your students either are Persian or they're hanging around Iranians, etc. They know we have one of our, we have good traits and bad traits. One of the negative ones can be the judgmentalness, pointing out people's errors in front of others to kind of make yourself look good and make them look bad, to assert our social norms. It's fine. Everyone has social norms, but in a toxic way. Let's keep it real, fellow Iranians. It's like one of those traits that maybe it's better that we don't pass down to our children. But this word abe has a lot of cultural resonance. Then the next word, rendān, this is just a plural. The singular is rend. You can translate it as libertine, profligate, rake. There's a lot of weird old words, but none
Maybe
of them
even
have
like
the
a
res.
rascal or wrongdoer.
Something like that. Yeah, you see
Rend.
these translations, but none of the words really have any cultural resonance anymore in the English language, and that's a big problem any Hafez translator has to overcome. But basically, a rend in the Persian language is someone who doesn't abide by the social norms. So whether they be in the domain of the way you dress or the lifestyle you live or the job that you chose, like us, we're doing this unconventional non-Persian parent approved lifestyle, right, in terms of our job and whatnot. And also in terms of religious practice. So Hafez is famous for having his own kind of spiritual way. And no one, I don't think, can fully claim to understand exactly what it is. But in more ways than one, he's rend. He doesn't live up to society's standards. So again, this word, the more Hafez you read, the more you kind of solidify or understand better exactly what he's getting at. So he's saying, do not lay fault, do not lay blame, don't point me out, don't call me out in front of everyone. And again, if you're not Persian, go ahead.
Let's say that first part, it's a command. So he starts the poem with a command. Aybé
Exactly.
rendān makon. Do not fault these rens, which, like you're saying,
Exactly.
has all these different translations. But I kind of see it as a rend is a kind of shaytun, like mischievous, like
Exactly. Yeah.
that type of connotation as well.
Exactly. And the idea is why? Because in the day of judgment, if you're an Abrahamic person, if you're a Jew, Muslim, Christian, etc., you believe that there's a day of judgment, and that on that day you're accountable for your deeds or misdeeds, and I'm accountable for mine. So why are you so worried about me anyway? You go do your own thing, and I'll do my own thing.
And what is Zahid Pakize Sirish?
Oh,
So he's
great.
addressing the Zahid Pakize
Exactly.
Sirish.
So in the translation, he says, though you're a pious prig by nature. So Zahid is literally someone who practices asceticism. And this means kind of living like a monk style of life, right? Not having nice clothes, not eating fancy food. But it's not viewed positively. Like if you say Buddhist monk, everyone thinks, wow, an enlightened person, a good heart, etc. Another thing is that in Islam, there's no monasticism in Islam. There's no concept of being a monk. So it's actually viewed as kind of negative. The idea is that in Muslim cultures, it's kind of seen as a show-offy thing. It doesn't have a positive connotation. So when Hafez talks about the Zahid, he talks about someone that has all like the fanfare of being a Muslim. Like they put on these hats and, they have, like I do, this Sufi poetry behind them. And they say, oh, mashallah, I'm so religious. But there's no inner content there. It's just all a big show, which unfortunately we Iranians are super, super familiar with nowadays. So Hafez is saying, oh, you are so pakize serisht. Pakize serisht means you're pure by nature. Oh, you're so pure by nature, aren't you? You're so great. And another element is Hafez is very fatalist. Also another thing you see in his poetry. He believes that everyone has this kind of fate that they have to live out. So he says, you are by nature. So there's a kind of the backhanded, oh, you're by nature. Then there's the other element where it's like, well, you just happen to be raised very pious and in a way that you temperamentally can live up by societal standards. Some people have a nature that makes them want to be different. Other people don't. So you just happen to be born in a conventional way. So why does that make you better just because you were born that way?
So aybé rendān makon, this command, do not blame or do not place blame or talk down to these rendāns. Ey zahid pakize sirish. Like you're saying, like it's kind of, oh, you pure-hearted aesthetic.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
And then the next line.
Sure. So he says, "Ke gunah digaran bar to nakhahan nevesh." So he says, the sin of others, gunah digaran, upon you بر تو نخواهند نوشت. They shall not, and this is a future tense, they shall not write it. Meaning the idea is, again, in Abrahamic faiths, like there's literally like an angel sitting and writing all your deeds.
Right.
That's why we say also, there's a saying, and I'll translate it, that when someone is really old and they kind of don't know what's going on anymore, they say the pen has been lifted. Like there's no more writing, even if they're alive. Right?
Right.
So he says that literally, imagine like they're writing, the angels are writing everything down. They're not going to write someone else's thing on your paper. They'll write his thing on his paper. So don't worry about it. Worry about your own life, your own problems, your own good or bad.
Don't fault others. Don't criticize others. Don't find fault with others.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Beautiful. And then the next, this might be my favorite line out of the whole thing. Beautiful. So let's say the next line in Persian. من اگر نیکم و گر بد تو برو خود را باش هر کسی آن درود عاقبت کار که کش. So he says, if I'm bad, من اگر نیکم و گر bad or bad, go be yourself. تو برو خود را باش. Why are you چرا میپیچی تو دیگران, as we'd say? Why do you twist and turn in other people's affairs? Now, obviously, if someone's bothering you, that's a different story, or if like they're your brother or child. But in terms of strangers, why are you bugging into a stranger's life, butting in, being fuzul, as we say, being nosy? Go let them live their life and you live yours. That word neek is also so rich and so like worth talking about. It's not, so bad obviously is a direct translation of the word bad. So bad, we know what that means. But neek is different than good. It's like, how would you translate neek? You can, if you wanted to have like a Sufi element, you could say righteous, doing good. Good is obviously a very kind of mundane sounding word, but it's also, it has another context that Iranians love this word because we say goftar-nik, pendar-nik, kardar-nik, also in that famous Zoroastrian phrase, good thoughts, good phrases, good deeds. That word also exists. And it just, I don't know, it sounds more beautiful than good. Good, maybe there's a better word than good in the English language. There definitely is, but it's not at the top of my mind. For me, what it has is it doesn't have that moral judgment of good. It's not just good or bad. It's like right, correct, good. It's like the truth. It's like if I am... It could be, yeah. Definitely. It's like all of those things wrapped up in one. So man agar nikam o gar bad. If I am right or if I'm bad. Like to boro khod ra bash. You go be you. Khod. Yeah. Khod is self. You be yourself. Be yourself. Exactly. Yeah. Go do your own thing. Go be yourself. Don't worry about me. What do you have to do with me anyway? Then he says, Har kasi an deravad aqebat kar ke kesht. Everyone. So deravidan is like a kind of an obscure word because let's be real. How many of us are farming these days? But it has a farming context. So literally, you reap what you sow, like we say in English. Every person reaps ultimately at the end of the affair the thing that they planted from keshtan. And kashtan is more common these days. So whoever has planted a seed, they'll reap that seed. So if you plant a good seed, you'll reap a good seed. That's fine for you. And if I plant a bad seed, you don't have to give me trouble. The seed that I planted will give me trouble. You don't have to yell at me. I'll get my comeuppings eventually. Amazing. Beautiful. Okay, next. همه کس طالب یارن چه هوشیار و چه مست همه جا خانه عشق است چه مسجد چه کنشت. So beautiful. So everyone seeks their beloved, their lover, their partner. This word yar, it's so hard to translate, but it's open in Persian. So the idea is whether you're seeking the Sufi yar, which the Sufis would say is God, the divine presence, etc., or the prophet or something like that, a saint, or if you're seeking a literal human being in the world, it could be either, right? Yar could be any of those things. So he says everyone is seeking a yar, everyone is seeking their desire, their beloved, etc. Whether they're drunk or sober. And again, it could be spiritual or non-spiritual, whether they're doing good or doing bad, right? You could. And hoshyar means like conscious. It's like more like conscious. So whether everyone is seeking that lover, or everyone is seeking that soulmate, whether they're conscious of it or they're masked, drunk, Exactly. So there's so many interpretations. One could be that hoshyar and mast means in the Sufi context, whether you're very serious and stern or zahid, or whether you're an ecstatic Sufi, like Rumi, spinning in circles and chanting and reciting poetry. Right. Another one, like you said, is consciously or with yearning. Or the other one could literally be you're not a drinker or literally a drinker. Whether it is all types of people, and all of those could be correct, or only one of them could be,
all types of people are ultimately seeking their desire. And you could even say one thing, right? Then he says, so the next one I think kind of lends more credence, like a more spiritual reading. He says, "Hame ja khane ishq ast, che masjid che kenisht." Everywhere is a home of love, whether it's a mosque or kanish could be a synagogue or a church. The words for non-Muslim places of worship, I feel like the definition is kind of dependent on what the biggest group is near the group of people. So it could be, it's kind of like kanise. Like kanise can mean a synagogue. Often it does, but I've also heard it used for church, for example. So it's up to he's interpreted as synagogue. It very well might be true. But the idea is whether you're, go ahead.
Oh, I'm surprised that that's because the first line is saying hoshyar or chemas. So that could be like whether you're pious or whether you're drunk. And then the second line is saying masjid, which is like an Islamic mosque. So is it saying kinisht is kind of like the bar or something, or no? It's still
so it could have a
religious.
I don't think it means bar. I think it literally means something like church or synagogue. And one, like there's so many elements. One element is that Muslims are traditionally not supposed to drink. So this masjid is where you would be sober, you would be not drunk. And then the kinisht is whether, Christian or Jew, is where you could drink. So that's one element. Another element, and I think there's this idea of kind of explaining the poets or a book that exists in this tradition using other lines in that book where other ideas have been elucidated. So one of them is "Agar pir mogan murshid ma shod che tafavut dar hich sari nist ke sirri z khuda nist." So Hafez says, if a Zoroastrian elder becomes our teacher or our spiritual guide, what difference does it make? There is no head that's empty of a secret from God. Every head is at least one secret from God. I think this lends credence to this view that he's saying all places of worship have some truth to them. There's some divine presence. Like Abu Sa'id says, I went to a church and they were all praying to you. And then I went to the idol house and the idols were whispering your name. And I went to this place. Or Sheikh Bahai says, Kaaba budkhane bahanas maqsud to. The Kaaba, the place of worship that Muslims pray to, and the house of idols where the Hindus are, it's all an excuse. You're the goal. The goal is you talking to God directly. So I think that's what Hafez is getting at here.
Okay.
Then he says, "Ne man az parde taqwa be dar uftadam o bas. Pedaram niz behesht abad az das behesht." So here, it's so beautiful. He says, I'm not the only one who fell through the veil of piety. So piety is like a veil. I'm not the only one who fell out of it, who became unveiled. My father, and this is a reference to Adam, who in the Abrahamic narrative is the father of all humans, the first prophet, the first human, the father. So he says, Pedaram. Also, now is a really fun plan where it's behisht means heaven. But we also have a verb hishtan, which is super archaic, which means to lose. Behisht means he lost. So my father also lost the heaven of eternity, the eternal heaven, the eternal abode. So Adam, who's my father, he was also banished from heaven for sinning, for transgressing. So I'm just his son, right? Like there's another phrase that says every person is a son of Adam, and every Adam has committed faults, right? So Hafez is saying, I'm not the only one. Now, another second layer is that Sufis always talk about the beloved or the truth being veiled. So when he says, I fell out of the veil of piety, it's almost like this obsession with superficial poverty. Of course, our piety, of course, being pious is good. If you're a good person, God conscious, great. But the superficial show element of, in our country, in all Muslim countries, there's people walk around with the tasbih. They're always doing the tasbih, and they're, wearing the big clothes, and they're always like saying subhanallah, and, making a huge show about how religious they are and all that. That's another veil. That's another thing. That's like ego. That's like obsession with wealth. That's like jealousy. That's like pride. Piety itself can prevent you from being God conscious because you're so obsessed with the show of it. The movements and the. Go ahead.
Let's go back to that first line then. So it's referring exactly to that person, right? So let's read that first line again. Aybé rendān makon.
Makon. Ey zahid pakize seresht.
Okay, so he's talking about that. It's like that
Exactly.
show of like being a pious person.
Exactly. And Hafez hates this. Hafez, what's the most important thing to him is to be straightforward about who you are. Now, I have this other theory that people can check in my Hafez Classic and go sign up and watch it, but I don't want to spend an hour here. But I have this theory that Hafez goes through progression in life, and that early in his life, he's just a standard conservative Muslim. And then, he's Hafez. He was raised in a household where you're made to memorize the Quran as a kid because that's the only time it's easy. So people force their kids to do it when they're like 6, 7, 8. So he was raised Hafez. Then he becomes a Sufi to kind of add the Sufi element. Then he becomes disenchanted and he goes off in his own and he makes his own spirituality. So Hafez, he's kind of living in this moment in life towards the end where he has gotten rid of this external piety thing. And his most important thing is to be straightforward about who you are. He hates more than anything hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is his biggest thing that he hates. So he says, I'm not pious by nature, and it's better for me to openly admit that and just take the blame and be humble and honest than to put on a show. Hafez talks about, he says, I'm paraphrasing, I used to put on a show with the cloak of Sufis, and I thought it would be better to pawn it for wine. Better not to make a show out of religion. Let people who are really religious be religious so they don't taint the name of religion. That's not, you don't want the other scenario, which we have in Islam, which is tons of people who aren't God conscious or pious or good people at all, making a big show, and all, not just Iran, it's all countries, Muslim countries, making a big show out of it and ruining the whole thing for everyone. So Hafez hates, so if he was alive today, he would have like, I mean, God forbid, he'd have like a heart attack. That's the situation. So anyway, so he says, Hafeza ruz ajal gar be kafari jami, یک سر از کوی خرابات برندت به بهش. So he says, oh Hafez, and this alif at the end is very poetic. It's just a Hafez.
Right.
It's evocative alif. On the day of death, when you die, if you bring up a glass of wine into your kaf, your palm, and back then they used to drink out of bowls as well. So if you think of like a Western wine glass, you can't hold it in your palm. But back then they had what's common in Central Asia today, piyale, as we say, a little bowl. So if you bring up a bowl of wine into your hand, yeksar, directly, as kuye kharabat, from the street of the wine house, barandat bebehesh, they'll send you to heaven. So this is kind of like, you don't know what to really think of this. Is it metaphorical?
Right.
Is it literal? Is it a bit of both? So I can't say I understand him fully. Hafez is a bit of, there's mystery there, but that's literally what the meaning is. Maybe we can leave it to the students to comment in the community section. Please tell me your interpretation of this line, because I'm in need of a little bit of help.
For sure. Well, let's go through each of the words so we can kind of, I mean, we'll do this in the later lessons, obviously, but this will come at the very end. So for now, let's go through it word by word and kind of translate so we can get the meaning a little bit better.
Sure.
Hafez ruz ajal. What is ruz ajal?
So literally the day of death.
Ajal. Okay. Gar be kaf ari jami. So like you said, so jam is what you drink wine out of.
Exactly, like a glass, a goblet. Exactly.
So if in your hand.
Agar. So gar is agar. Agar. I think I saw that in a comedy show. I think you guys covered that. Agar. If bekaf, to your palm, ari. Ari is avari. Like we'd say in contemporary, like biari. Agar biari bekaf yek jam. So jam is just yek jam. Yeksad. Here's a small little Tehrani thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead. In Tehran, the taxis, they do have two ways, and this freaks out people who aren't used to it. There's yeksar or mustaqim, which means directly, like a normal Western taxi, and then khati. Khati is people get in with you. You share the ride because of the traffic.
Yes.
And sometimes people think they're getting kidnapped, like a foreign Iranian goes to Iran, and then like someone gets in the car, like, what's going on? Who is this person? Anyway, so yeksar is like suddenly, with no delay. And this even, you might interpret it without even the day of judgment, without questioning, just suddenly. Yeksar barandat as kuye kharabat, from the wine house street to behesht. One small note, last note. Sometimes when you read poetry, you think, these words are so foreign to us. What's the point of reading this? I want to just talk to people. Sometimes these poems, if you just change one or two letters, it's exactly how we talk. Kui, in Persian, a lot of words used to have Y. That's why we say Khodaya. Khodaya is a Khoda, but it had a Y at the end. Many words, Pai. That's why we say Paidar, Khodaya. Even you see the Y's sticking around. But normally we say Khoda, Pa. Kui became Ku. Ku is Kuche today, little street. So Ku means street. Kuche is little street. I know, I had that moment when I looked it up.
Wow.
So khiyaban used to mean something like meadow. They call streets khiyaban because the idea is, not unfortunately in Iran, they don't look like that anymore, is that the street would be full of roses and grass and like a boulevard.
Wow. Okay.
That's why we call it khiyaban. I found this out because I read a poem that was old and was talking about like meadows and khiyaban. And I'm like, they didn't have
Well,
boulevards.
did you know
anyway.
that bi-aban means without water? Bi-aban.
I know when I learned that, I swear, when you learn bi-aban, like when you learn these things, everything just starts to click.
Yes.
So Persian poetry will do this for you. A lot of things will click. You're like, oh, that's not so different than the way we speak today.
Amazing.
Like, it's not like Shakespeare in English today. It's really close in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So
right. Kui. So, and we learned this word kui in the last Hafez poem. We learned it was Zekui yar miyayad nasim bade noruzi. So from the alleyway of the lover comes the wind of change of Nowruz, of the new year.
Beautiful.
But then, so here, yeksare as kuye kharabon. So that's kuye kharabon. I love it. So kharab means like messed up, like
broken.
Bad,
yeah, exactly.
Broken. So there's
a small.
This is where the bars is.
Exactly.
Like
so no, literally. That's the same idea. Yeah, kharabat. It's kharabat. It's broken down. All kinds of profligates and no good people there. So Hafez preferred to be in that place with the lowly people, but with no pretenses.
Right.
He didn't want pretenses. He didn't want to put on a show. This is the number one theme over and over again in Hafez, you'll see. And I really love, if you can take one lesson from Hafez, it's just be who you are. Whoever you are, just be who you are.
Yes.
No one likes that more for you. Yeah. It's no one likes, even living a fake life is poisonous for us, and it makes other people dislike us or find us weird or mislead. Just best to be yourself. Don't have pretenses. Be comfortable. Live easy.
So then as kuye kharabat, so you're holding this jame in your calf,
this
in your
goblet
palm.
Of wine, yeah.
So as kuye kharabat, barandet bebehisht. They will take you to behisht, which is again that word for heaven.
Exactly. Let's just take it off straight to heaven. So Hafez is really funny. You know, sometimes he's very arrogant. Sometimes he's confident like here. Other times he's hating on himself a lot. So I'd encourage you guys to spend more time and see the different sides of him and see why we Iranians adore him and have statues of him and go to his grave and, have his book in our shelf right here.
Yes. So again, I'll say that this is such a rich poem. I think that we could talk about this for hours. Again, go through each of the words. And so we will have 5-part lesson after this, going through this entire poem word by word, phrase by phrase. And I am too very excited about the discussion that will come from this. We ask our students to analyze these words and see what they figured out. And I think once we put all of these together, this poem tells a really beautiful story. So thank you for sharing this with us. Is there any final thoughts that you want people to think as they're reading through these words and phrases of this poem?
Yeah, I definitely want to say that just, it's really good to ponder on these poems. Don't think, I hear it all the time, these are ancient, they're not related to us. They have wisdoms that are so relevant to us today. And I just wanted to say thank you for having me. So maybe some people have seen me before, but my name is Muhammad Ali. I don't know if I even said my name. Usually I'm so bad at these things. I go on by Shakespeare as well as Persian Poetics. And I also have a class on Hafez. And I do teach him. So if anyone else is interested, they can come to me and we can get into these little nerdy details that people like me are interested in.
Yeah, we'll have all of that information on our show notes and how to get in touch with Muhammad Ali. But of course, he's a big friend of the show. We have him on all the time. And so again, thank you for being here and for sharing this really beautiful poem with us. We're really excited. At the end, after our subsequent lessons, we ask our students to send us videos of themselves reciting the poem in a beautiful location. So we'll have all of that to look forward to as well. Awesome. So thank you, Muhammad Ali. And until next time.
Thank you so much, Leyla.